Hey there, welcome back to Reddit XO, the best channel for Reddit cheating stories. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification for more stories like these. Now, let's get into the video. Found my girlfriend was cheating on me with a close friend, so I had him arrested and ghosted her. So, as a longtime Redditor, I've decided to tell you all about a story that just ended. I've created a different Reddit account only for this, since I want to protect those who aren't members of the Reddit community, and I've changed everyone's identities. Please let me know whether this belongs in r/pro or if it should be moved someplace else. I've never posted in this sub before, but a buddy suggested I do so. Please accept my apologies for any grammatical or spelling issues. The TLDR version will be at the bottom, but hold on tight because this is going to be a long one. Information about the background: incoming sadness. My wife Rachel and I grew up in a medium-sized town of roughly 30,000 people. We met when we were little, I'm guessing around the ages of 6 or 7. We were almost inseparable. When we were 16 years old, we started dating. When we were 18, we headed out to look for work in a city just a few hours away. We were married and had bought our first house before turning 20. When she was 22, we discovered she was pregnant with her first child. Then disaster struck. Around 5 weeks before her maternity leave, a big shelf unit toppled and crushed her. According to what I was told, she and our child were both slain instantly. 2 of her employees were also injured in the accident. One of them was paraplegic and had to have his leg amputated. To conserve money, the company she worked for decided to maintain using outdated shelving that had been deemed unsafe rather than replace it. I still haven't forgiven the executives and management personnel who made that decision, since they destroyed my love while also eliminating our pregnancy. It wasn't long before I was told I had a choice about how to proceed with what her business referred to as compensation, but I referred to it as blood money. They intended to avoid a lawsuit by reaching an out-of-court settlement. I, on the other hand, was out for their blood. To be clear, this isn't the revenge, it's still in the background. Fortunately, due to media attention and the participation of numerous politicians, the situation was quickly settled in court, about 3 years, with a settlement for all parties that was over 10 times the amount that they had first pledged. They were substantially punished for violating workplace, health and safety standards, executives were sacked, some were imprisoned, and so on. Perhaps this is a story for another time, when I'm more at ease sharing it. At the time, I was still employed in telecommunications. While all of this was going on, my mother, bless her soul, had moved in to help me. I'm sure I would have cried if she hadn't been so interested. I was awarded a promotion around this time, although it entailed substantial travel around the state. I requested an office in my hometown's branch because I wanted to serve firms not only in the state, but also in my hometown, where there was no business representative, and they consented. After a few months, we settled into a routine of 1 to 2 weeks at the city office, 1 week in my hometown, and 1 to 2 weeks traveling the remainder of the state. After a year, I decided to buy a house in my hometown so that I wouldn't have to stay at my parents' house every week or so, that I was home and could come and go whenever I wanted. This becomes important later in the story. Our narrative starts around 4 years later. I apologize for the long explanation. I had just returned from one of my outings and was checking in some stuff at my office on Friday when Harry, the branch's managing director, strolled in. We had grown up together as well, but had gone to different schools, but had formed a deep bond since returning. He asked how I was doing and then invited me to a house party he was holding that evening. Despite the short notice, I said yes. I felt like I earned a few drinks with my friends. It was there that Harry introduced me to Catherine. She was a new hire at the branch where my hometown's office was located, and since she was new in town, she was still getting to know everyone. We clicked straight immediately. As cheesy as it sounds, it was almost as if Rachel were in front of me rather than Catherine. I won't go into detail, but after 2 years of dating, we decided to take the next step, and she moved into my hometown's house. Up until this time, everything had been going swimmingly. Catherine and my parents got along well, and Rachel's parents were relieved that someone could make me as happy as Rachel had. Things had been going well for about a year when things began to change. Skype conversations were cut short. Neighbors would tell me how a car, identified as Harry's, was often noticed parked in a back alley near my house while I was away, and some apparel that wasn't mine was in my closet. All signs pointed to her adultery, but she insisted that nothing was wrong. She said that Harry would stop over on occasion to discuss business, but he never stayed the night. I chalked it up to paranoia and went about my business as if nothing was amiss, but there was always this nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. It took me almost 6 months to realize she had been fooling me. I had just negotiated a rather big transaction with a new business, and the negotiations had ended sooner than I had anticipated. So, rather than remaining a few more days, I decided to go home early and surprise everyone. After a few hours, I drove into my hometown and into the alley behind my house, intending to surprise Catherine. However, I was curious to check whether the mystery car was there. There was, in fact, a car blocking the back access gate. I was confused for a moment, thinking it was a negligent neighbor who had parked, only to discover it was Harry's truck. I may have driven straight past my own home if it hadn't been for the high hedge line I'd put for privacy a few years back. I stepped out of my vehicle after pulling up behind his automobile and felt it was odd that he was there so late. He had always left by now, she remarked. As I approached the back of the house, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Catherine and Harry were squabbling in my kitchen. I became utterly immobile. Time had stopped. On my kitchen bench, my close friend was having with my girlfriend. I was at a loss for what to do. My mind was racing with so many ideas. Was I dreaming or waking up? Why were they having in my house? Disappointed, I turned and went away without anybody noticing. I sat in my car for what seemed like an eternity. I burst into tears, hard. However, the sorrow quickly turned to wrath. The same fury I felt for those who were responsible for Rachel's death. I wanted to cause them agony, badly. I am a pacifist who does not support violence. I knew I was going to punish them and destroy their lives at that point. And what better time than now to begin started? I drove back up the alley, far enough away from my driveway to see Harry's car, then returned to the gate, where I could see inside the house, and dialed her phone. When the phone rang, they were still going for it. They both did a second take when they saw my name on the caller ID. They let it ring since I could see she was contemplating about answering it. After a few seconds, they were back into it, and I called again. This time, she did answer. I hung up while she was responding and went back to my car. She returned my call as quickly as I did. When she asked why I was calling so late, I said that I was about 10 minutes away from home and didn't want to scare her away by coming in. She was clearly startled and thrilled that I was coming, and the talk quickly stopped when she indicated that she needed to go up and change into something. I hung up the phone after saying my goodbyes. Harry went through the gate, still half naked, and got into his car, driving away like a bat out of hell. I smiled a little, knowing how scared both of them would be if they were captured. I'd paused for a few minutes before driving into the precise location where Harry had been moments earlier. The remainder of the night was calm, and I didn't get out of bed until she was asleep to go to my office down the hall. I couldn't fall asleep. I needed to devise a strategy, and I devised a strategy. My mother always pushed me to be a peacemaker and to let cosmic karma do its thing. However, in this case, I determined that karma may benefit from some aid. I intended to punish them both separately, but also to destroy them both. I was aware of Harry's drug addiction. It wasn't anything major, yet he kept it to himself. I only discovered it by accident after discovering some coke and weed left out at his house, but I pretended I hadn't seen it when he attempted to cover it up. I began calling some of my more questionable customers and politely inquiring about gathering some samples that they were willing to leave with. After a few days, I had amassed a sufficient cash to make my method work. A month later, I invited friends, including Harry, around for a BBQ night. I persuaded Harry to stay the night and sleep it off after assuring that I had sufficiently boozed him up. I took the drugs and a range of my personal belongings and concealed them in various spots around his car, the majority of which was in his tire well. In the early hours of that morning, I locked the car and went inside to sleep, certain that he wouldn't find them during the months it would take for the rest of my plan to take effect. I also left some other drugs and personal items at his residence after taking him home, since he was still too drunk to drive. A few days later, I staged a break-in by smashing the rear glass of my back door into my kitchen and leaving it open before heading to the city for a trip. As soon as I arrived, I was inundated with letters. One from my clearly concerned mother, who had noticed the broken back door and called the authorities. One from Catherine, who was in tears, and one from the local cops, who asked me to call. I informed the officers that I was away on business and would return the following week to deal with them after receiving all of the calls. Stay tuned for the next part.